OKRs with some hyphens in there. You will find these slides from the day, so feel free to grab those. And again, reach out to me if you have any questions that you don't get to later today. I'm always happy to have a chat. Pause for the photos. All right, we got them all? One last. All right, cool. Let's talk about this, because I used to roadmap like this. I used to have really bad road mapping habits. As a matter of fact, this is my old roadmap from a previous company I worked for here in London years ago. And you know what? When I did this, I thought I was doing a good job. Like, my boss would give me a little pat on the head and be like, good job, like, now go deliver the roadmap. And I didn't realize that this isn't great road mapping practice. Because you know what? Honestly, this is how everyone else was doing it. If you do a Google search, like in images right now, and look up product roadmap, this is what you get. Like, most of them just seem to be a whole bunch of pretty timelines, like what I was doing. So it felt like I was probably doing the right thing, right? Now, reality is, as a product manager, you're the person who owns the roadmap. You're the person responsible for the roadmap. That's kind of what we do, right? But we're not the ones who necessarily get to say what goes on the roadmap. You know, oftentimes that's the execs, the investors, sometimes it might be your CRO or the sales team who's influencing that. And they're the ones who are asking for due dates and deliveries and durations and clarity on exactly what's going to be delivered and when. And it can put you under a lot of pressure. You know, there's a reason why product manager as a job title was once listed as the toughest job or one of the unhappiest jobs in America. Now, what's actually going on with roadmaps? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if so many of you are disenchanted with your roadmaps today. So I want to actually address that and hopefully get you to a point where you can actually start thinking about lean road mapping and OKRs in a healthier way. Because a lot of people have turned away from roadmaps over the years, but there are better ways, so let's talk about them. I want to give you ways to give your teams product direction in a nice lean way. So that's our goal for today. So, why are roadmaps letting us down? Well, here's what a traditional roadmap looks like. And this is what I used to do as well. Now, if you look at this format of the roadmap, it doesn't look so bad, especially, you know, if you start breaking it down in the short term. But essentially, if you break it down, it's like a math chart with things to do on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, creating this timeline. And at first, it seems pretty easy to use, especially in the short term with the things that you've broken down with your developers and have agreement on. But the further out you plan and the more you put on there, the harder it becomes to manage. And because that timeline sits at the top, always marching forward, everything you put on that roadmap, by default, has a due date and duration stated to be shown to everybody, to lock you in on that. And that becomes a real problem. This is where timeline roadmaps start letting you down. So what could possibly go wrong with this? Well, you end up with made-up release dates that send your developers on these marches to deliver things on time, and it gets really stressful. And oftentimes they end up, you know, delivering junk code that they don't get a chance to get back and fix. You end up mismanaging expectations from your customers, your sales team. They think something's going to be done, but it ends up slipping and slipping. They don't end up happy with you. And oftentimes, because you're so focused on delivering what was on the roadmap that you said was going to be there at the beginning of the year, you miss opportunities of things that you could have built if you were actually looking at the wider problems that you could have been solving along the way. And oftentimes, you just end up building downright the wrong thing. And that leads to you being sad product managers. So, is there a better way? Well, yeah, of course there is. This is why I'm here to talk. Lean road mapping. Now, lean, we're all probably familiar with this concept of build, measure, learn as being kind of core to the idea of lean. And it's that learn piece that's really, really key here. It's that iterative process of doing and learning from what you've actually done in the past. And this is where road mapping can really help. Because I see your roadmap as a tool to help you learn and iterate at the product strategy level. Right? And so this concept of prototyping, we do a lot. I mean, I like to think of your roadmap being a prototype for your strategy. So this concept of prototyping, we do quite a lot. I mean, when you're doing a new feature, you don't take your feature idea and run straight to your engineering team and just tell them what to go build and hope that you end up with something good. If anybody's ever tried that, you know that what you end up with is never quite the right thing, and they miss something, and your assumptions are generally unchecked and wrong. What you generally do is you sketch it down on a piece of paper or some sort of sketching tool, Marvel or Figma or something, and you show it to somebody. You show it to a teammate, you show it to a customer, you show it to anybody who'll listen, and they'll give you feedback. And they say something like, oh, well, this is cool, but what does that part mean? Maybe if you added a button, that would be clear. Maybe if you added some copy or took away that part. You're like, okay, cool, that's good insight. So you throw out the prototype and you make a new one that's clearer and better, and it's closer to being able to solve the problem that you were hoping that feature would solve. And what's happening there is that the value isn't in the prototype, that gets thrown out. The value is in the prototyping process and the conversations that it facilitates. So road mapping can be similar. Road mapping is really about taking your high-level assumptions about the steps you need to take to meet your vision, the steps you need to take to solve various problems as part of your strategy, laying them down in a super basic format, and just saying, here's my assumptions. I think we need to go here, then here, then here. And I've got this based on listening to you in tech, and you in marketing, you in the customer-facing role, and you in the business-facing role. I've listened to all of you, and I think we need to go here, 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 and here. What do you think? And you show it to some people and they go, actually, I thought we were supposed to go this way, that way, the other way. Oh, well, it's good we had this conversation now and not, when we started building the wrong thing. So road mapping at the prototype, or road mapping helps you prototype at the strategy level. It helps you check your assumptions if you're thinking about your roadmap not as the plan, but as the prototype for your strategy. Now, it's important to remember that product is uncharted territory. Each one of us here in the room is building something completely unique. No one here is building the same product as the other person, and no one here is building a product that has been built before. This isn't like prefab IKEA furniture or prefab housing or something like that. This is unique territory. You can't just pull out Google Maps and pull up a map to where you're going. It's as if you've landed on a new, unknown shore, and you have to gaze out to the distance and figure out, well, where is it we're trying to go? What's that thing in the distance, and what's right in front of us? What resources do we have? Who's on our team? How far out can we see? What sort of problems and things are in front of us? So you might land on this shore and scan the horizon. And this is where the concept of the now, the next, the later time horizons come in. It's pretty human. You're like, well, the things in the now are the things that are like right in front of me. I can see them. They're clear. If there's a problem there, I can see it. I can deal with it. I can step over it or punch it or whatever, right? The things that are next are kind of in that middle distance, and the things that are further away are, foggy. I can see them, but, they're not a really big problem for me right now, but I need to know about them if that's where I'm trying to head. And so, you might imagine that you land on this new unknown shore and there's a bear, there's a problem right in front of you. And so that's the first thing you need to deal with. That takes up your attention, and so it becomes this fine-grained problem that you break down going, well, how are we going to deal with that? Right? You're not going to go deal with something in the middle distance unless you deal with this problem. Likewise, you can see off into the far distance. There might be some gold-topped mountain that's your goal. Now, you probably want to inform the team that that's the mountain that you see, because they all need to head in that general direction, but and there might be problems around that mountain that you want to specify, like maybe we need mountain climbing gear or warm clothes or something like that. But that's too fine-grained. Like, you can deal with that later. Just talk about the mountain, which one you want to aim for. Right? That's the level of granularity you're going for in these different columns here, these different horizons. And you can see off in the middle distance in a bunch of different directions. And that's really key. These horizons mean that it's like a radius around you. Like, you can see off in this direction and this direction. There might be a problem this way. There might be a problem this way. There might be, a path that you can take in different directions. So as a product manager, your job is to figure out which path, which steps you're going to take. And each step that you take helps lead you to or skirt around other problems or other opportunities along the way. And so this is really the reality of road mapping, an uncharted territory, a series of steps that you could take. It's not a roadmap path of linear steps that you're going to take along a path that's already been mapped out by somebody else. And so these time horizons translate into the columns, where the things that are in the now column are very granular, high level of detail, and the things that are in the later column are very flexible, very broad scope. Now, you might have landed on this shore, and you might discover that your team starts bickering right away because, you might have all agreed that there's a problem right in front of you and you're all heading off in that direction, but unless you have a sense of, what's important, what success looks like to the team, you're going to start heading off in different directions. You don't know what success looks like. So this is where OKRs come into play. This is why they're so powerful when used in conjunction with lean road mapping. But why do so many teams give up on OKRs? Who here has tried OKRs? Who here, keep your hands up if you've given up on them in the past. Yeah, quite a few people, right? Like sometimes it just doesn't quite feel like it fits because they can be difficult and there's a lot of things that aren't quite right with them in various ways. So I want to address some of these things. So what are OKRs for anybody who hasn't used them? So it stands for Objectives and Key Results. Objectives are the high-level qualitative success measures. Key results are the quantitative, measurable metrics that you're attaching to those objectives. Now, the magic of OKRs is that they cascade and the team each contributes or talks about how they can contribute to those objectives. So the team might outline a North Star objective or a team level objective, and the team would then say how each of those are going to contribute to that. So this is different than middle management or top management saying, our goal is this, and therefore we're going to get you to do this much, and you to do this much, and you to do this much. Because if they do that, they're kind of missing out on the collective knowledge of each of these different team people, these heads or groups, to say what they actually can do and what they're actually seeing. What we're basically saying is, here's the problem. You tell me, what can you deliver? You tell me, what can you deliver? You tell me, what can you deliver? And each team steps up and says, well, here's what we think we can do. Here's what we think we can do. And team 3 says, oh, actually, if we did our part, there'd still be a gap. So we still need help here. And somebody else says, okay, well, we can step up and do this part. It's a little bit like, remember Lord of the Rings, that scene when they're talking about trying to get to Mordor. It's this big challenge. It's their North Star challenge, really, their objective. And each person steps in and says, well, one says, well, you can have my sword. And the other one says, you can have my axe. And the other one says, you can have my bow. And they all sort of step in with the parts that they can fill. And once they've actually realized that they've got enough, they head on their way and they solve the problem. So each team is using their skills to talk about how they can solve the problems. And they're using the collective knowledge of the whole team, of the whole company, to decide how they're going to solve these problems, as opposed to trying to fill that from top down and using only the knowledge of top management. Now, here's one of the ways that objectives goes wrong, because there's a missing middle child: initiatives between objectives and key results. And I suppose it's maybe not mentioned because Okrs doesn't have a great ring to it. I don't know. But initiatives are like the actions you need to take in order to make those objectives happen and to meet those key results, those metrics happen that you're talking about in those key results, right? So, an objective is what you need to achieve. The key result is what good looks like, and the initiative is the actions we'll take to get there. It's the connective tissue. So they're often not mentioned, but this is where roadmaps come in. So an example, let's say the objective here is to improve your overall health to avoid illness or injury. That's your objective. And perhaps you have some key results that you're going to measure for that, something measurable and specific and time-bound. You might say, let's lose 15 pounds by the end of the year. Stretch goal. All right. Now, you're not just going to melt that off. You're going to have to maybe introduce regular exercise to your schedule, right? And maybe you need to do multiple initiatives in order to do that, right? Maybe not just exercise, but also refactor your diet or your code or whatever we're talking about here, right? You also might find that there are You also might find that there are multiple key results and multiple initiatives that are connected to each other, but the idea here is that you need something to connect those objectives and key results. So what this is actually helping to address is this problem that I call OKR drift. You know you've got OKR drift. Well, it happens when you get teams who have their OKRs set up in one place. Sometimes it's a spreadsheet, sometimes it's like OKRs often sit inside like feedback and HR, employee engagement type tools, and they go and do their OKRs in this tool over here. And then they go off and they do their product work over in this tool over here. And by the time they get back to the OKRs at the end of the quarter, they realize they haven't looked at their OKRs all quarter. They've been hidden away in some sheet or some other SaaS tool, and they look at their OKRs and they go, oh, well, we kind of did other stuff because we learned and we iterated over the course of the quarter and we didn't really think about what we were actually going to, you know, what needed to be adjusted here, what we were actually looking at. So what you want to do here is you want to connect your objectives to your key results using initiatives. And initiatives are the pieces on your roadmap. So you've got the 3 different columns, the now, next, and later, and then each of these cards on the roadmap is what you'd consider an initiative, like the what are you going to do? And in what order are you going to tackle them? This is when you start mapping out those steps. You know, you got a bear and a fire and later you've probably got a mountain in the distance there, right? Whatever your problems and opportunities and initiatives are. And so this is one way that you might look at a roadmap, one format, and you can see that you can connect them to experiments, the ways that you're going to tackle them. Another format might be to group them by objective, but same sort of concept in that you can see what the objectives are and what the initiatives are, and then again you could drill into these and show the key results for each of them. But the idea is that the two go hand in hand. The whole purpose of this lean roadmap and this objective-focused roadmap is that it takes the focus off hitting delivery dates and just launching a bunch of features by a delivery date. Because if you do that, you'll just end up with a bunch of features. And everyone knows that a whole bunch of features doesn't make a better product. Your focus is on solving problems and solving the right problems with the resources that you have. And there's nothing more lean than that. Now, the big question I always get is like, okay, great, I get this. Right? Product manager, we understand why we don't want to have the old school roadmaps, we want to have the new school roadmaps. But how do I get my team on board? Well, it depends. Now, it wouldn't be a product management event if there wasn't an it depends slide, but it does, because it depends on who it is who's asking, right? So it could be your boss, your investor, it could be salesperson or marketeer or the customers. They all want different levels of granularity or information. Now, I can tell you that for each of these, there is different ways that you can handle their objections, ways that you can show your boss that having delivery dates doesn't make you go faster. It makes you actually deliver worse code. Showing your investor that actually they want to invest in a better team, not just a delivery timeline. If they wanted that, they could just buy an agency. Showing your salespeople and your marketeers the value of selling what you have already rather than trying to sell something that doesn't exist yet. There's ways around this that you can help these different stakeholders get on board. Now, I don't have time to go into all of these right now because each of you are going to have specific stakeholders and specific questions about all of them. I did, however, write a guide that covers all of these. So it's a 6-page guide, and the last page on there is about getting your team on board, and it covers all these different types of stakeholders. And it is all about how to ditch that timeline roadmap and move to the now, next, later, and use OKRs, and very importantly, how to get those different team members on board. I'm also happy to answer any questions about those specific questions, because I know they are pertinent. Also, if you want to try the now, next, later roadmap format, we have in ProdPad what we call the Sandbox Mode, and it's completely free. It's just you don't need a credit card, you can just go in and use it now. And what you actually basically do is it has example roadmaps with example OKRs, and you can move it around and play with it and see what a good roadmap looks like, and then use it to compare with your own. So just a little sandbox to play in. Give it a try. We're all product managers at ProdPad, so we'd love your feedback on it as well. So hopefully this has inspired or helped some of you understand why the old format doesn't work, and inspire maybe some of you to take a step away from the old timeline way of working and step in with a new, leaner way of working. And with that, I want to say thank you very much. I know that you might have some questions. I know that you might want to connect later. Feel free to. I am going to be here for Q&A. In the meantime, thank you so much for your time and attention, and great to see you all here.
Brilliant, thank you. Excellent, brilliant, thank you very much. We just wanted to address a few of the tech things from the questions coming through from YouTube. Thank you everyone who's been messaging on there. We will make sure that key slides with key information that may not have been as visible is available. What I will do is I'll just read out that the bit.ly link here in case you want to view it from Janna, which is bit.ly/lean-roadmapping-OKRs. So definitely head to there, and like I said, we'll make sure the key slides are available to everyone. Excellent talk, Janna. Thank you so much for running us through that. Let me just check. So final kind of thing as well is you should be able to see on the YouTube stream the Slido link, but for those that are in the room again, just a reminder, if you do have questions and you want to submit them to the Slido, please use hashtag 6552283 in order to log in. Quick question at the back there. Say again, sorry there. Can you just remove the YouTube type questions now that it's split? Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, yep, they won't be covered in the question, don't worry. Okay, brilliant. And yes, excellent. I think that was all the admin stuff bits there from the live stream, and thank you also to the many streamers that we have tuning in. So I will now hand over to Navin, who is founder and CPO at London Product Group. Thank you, Navin.
All right. Cheers. Hi guys, so yes, hopefully amazing talk from Janna. Hopefully you guys are now inspired on what the importance of moving to outcome-driven roadmaps is all about. My favorite part, ironically, I was just telling Janna, is the little in developer joke where the developer's saying basically, I need a HTML tag BR. I don't know if anyone else caught that little detail. Amazing, by the way, I love that one. I'm still a techie at heart, I guess. But yeah, so I really want to talk to you about that journey. Essentially, how do you make that transition from where you are now to being more driven by outcomes? And essentially, let's start almost with the story of my first journey into outcomes. So a few years back when I was a humble product manager, I was at a large company, very political atmosphere and very output driven. But somehow, and I still to this day don't know how, I managed to convince my head of product, my boss, let's try an initiative. Let's try an actual experimental outcome-driven approach. So the whole goal was around personalization. We really want to engage people via personalization. And we were going to run experiments and do all kind of lean tests and things. And we kicked off and it was, I'm going to tell you, it was amazing. I was loving it for the first couple of weeks. Developers loved it because we were like prototyping and we weren't giving solutions. They could try whatever they wanted and random ideas. Designers loved it because they were like getting to do research with customers at the start, and they were working with the developers, so there was no kind of like barriers. And even stakeholders, because we were doing this collaboratively. So we were bringing all the different teams around and making them part of the ideation, part of the discussion. So it was like, I mean, it was beautiful, in my opinion. But the only person who didn't like it was my boss, ironically. And it was a very weird thing where it was like, we'd be in team meetings and it would be like, oh yeah, this is great. And then one-to-one, it'd be this really indirect kind of like, oh, I'm not sure, like what's gonna happen, etc. And I'm like, it's okay, I think I'm doing a good job. See, in 2 or 3 weeks, it'll be fine. And long story short, I did not get 2 or 3 weeks. Before I knew it, I was pulled off the project and someone else was brought in and I was kind of sidelined, which was really like, I'm not gonna lie, it really hits your ego when you're taken off a project quite publicly in front of everybody. But it was a good lesson because I learned afterwards that essentially what happened is my head of product had decided what the outputs were going to be and had already promised a different part of the business what we were going to do. And I couldn't read between the lines to see, okay, this is what I was supposed to do. I was kind of going off reservation. Since then, I've done this a lot more and I've made a lot more mistakes. But when you're making these changes, and I think this applies to a lot of times, but it all starts off nice, shiny, exciting. Everyone's enthusiastic. Everyone's full of energy, full of ideas. You're discussing, ideas are flowing, the juices are flowing, and pretty quickly reality kind of hits you pretty hard, and you start to hit issues, and you start to like just get stuck and mired. And you know, hands up if you've been in that situation where you're trying to change the process, and it's just not working, right? Yeah, okay, thank you. It was going to be super awkward if no one lifted their hand, by the way, but thanks. Yeah, it's really crazy. So that's what I want to talk about. And look, I could try to sit here and look, my goal here is to try to teach, I guess, to educate in some way, like a very lofty goal, but we have a very limited amount of time. And when I sat down and wrote this, I came up with like 3 hours of content for this talk, and I had to slim it down. So this is like me trying to slim it down, and it's still probably a bit too long for the time, so just FYI. I should probably take Janna's hint and write a guide and then kind of put it on my website, and that's a pretty good idea, see? That's why I come to these talks, is to learn from other people, so. But the best I can do is just give you some tips from my experience. It's not gonna be exhaustive. Hopefully you will have experienced this or are about to experience it. But I'm going to try to make it as relevant as possible. But maybe the questions are where we can really delve into more specific questions, because that's what I really love, is like, you've got a problem, let's talk specifics. But I'll try to keep it short, sharp, and to the point. So let's see how this goes. So who am I? This is probably how I think of myself in my head, God's gift to product. Obviously, that's what was me a few years back. But over the years, I've come to realize it's kind of more like this. I'm just basically bumbling along, making a lot of mistakes, but to be fair, learning from my mistakes. And when I talk about things, it's because I've been there. I've done those mistakes, and I love those mistakes, because that makes me who I am. And if I think about my journey, I started out as a developer. It's been so long, I don't think I can even call myself an ex-developer anymore. I'm probably like an ex-developer, because it's been so long. And I really stumbled into it. I had no idea what product management was. Internal promotion, what's the worst that could happen 20 years later? No, 10 years, sorry. But yeah, stumbled into it, got the job, and I loved it. Like, I absolutely loved the job. I was in the middle of all these discussions and conversations. I read all the books, you know, all the kind of inspired by Marty Kagan, Lean Startup, everything. But the truth is, I absolutely sucked at the job, like in every way possible. Like, developers hated me because I was still acting like a developer, talking about solutions, and they were like, get the fuck out of here, mate. Salespeople, strangely, did not appreciate my direct feedback on their ideas. I thought they just didn't know how bad their ideas were, and if I explained it to them, everything would be great. Apparently not. And leadership really don't like it when you question every decision they make and ask about the strategy, or lack of strategy, to be blunt. So generally, this is what it felt like. And this experience for me was quite initially traumatic, to be honest. But then I realized actually this was a great foundation, because I pretty much learned what not to do, right? There's nothing left for me to like make mistakes on, hopefully. And really my next role was at the BBC, which I think is a very political organization. It's not a place I'd recommend if you want to be an autonomy, you know, a product manager with autonomy and authority, but it's a great place for learning. Like, we would have great people coming in and giving talks, and there was great training materials. So I kind of learned the flip side of what I should be doing, essentially. And then now, then pretty much I got bored. Like, I get bored very quickly, so did the whole PM to CPO route, got bored, and I just needed more variety and excitement. So became a product coach, work with people, solving problems, do a bunch of training stuff. So I've done stuff for GA and product school, but really now I'm focusing on kind of my own courses through my company. So I do a lot of different things, but I love what I do, and the honest truth is, like, you know, sales pitch, but I would do this if I wasn't paid, to be really honest, although don't tell any of my clients, because that's going to kill things. And here, if you're into that kind of thing, here are some companies that I've worked with or worked for in the past. So my first point really is one out of three. Change is really, really, really hard, and I think it's very easy for us to underestimate the actual what that means, that statement there. So let's try something. Again, I'm going to rely on you guys for this to work. So, I mean, we'll share the blame 50-50 if this doesn't work. But how many people are trying to, like, be healthier? Give me a show of hands if you're trying to be healthy. Okay, phew. This is, again, okay. So now put your hands up if you're finding it difficult. Okay, so most of the same people. I see a little wiggling, so there's maybe most people and a half, let's say. Now, okay, give me a show of hands if you think the reason is because you don't know what you do. So basically, show me if it's not knowledge. So give me a hands up if you know what to do, but you're still struggling. Okay, so most of the same people are coming up. The point there I'm trying to make is that we can know what we should do, and we can still basically not do it. I'll give you an example. I'm also trying to be healthy, and yet last night I had a burger takeaway. Today I had a sandwich and crisps and a Kit Kat. Those are not the habits of someone who is trying to be healthy, and I know exactly what I should be doing. So this is when I know and we know what we should be doing. Now imagine you don't know what you're doing. So let's try another tenuous analogy here, but Imagine you're a Domino's delivery guy and you are on your bike delivering, and let's say you can do 10 pizzas a day. Now we look at this situation, we say 10 pizzas, you can't carry much, you can't get around fast, let's do something better. So let's get you a car. But the problem is, I don't know how to drive. So there's kind of like a skills gap. So what do we think is gonna happen if we just hand someone the keys to a car and say, look, you've got to now do this by driving. And you don't know London, you've never driven in London, you've never driven before. What do you think? Who thinks this is gonna go well? Give me a show of hands if anyone thinks this is gonna go well. Okay, no. And this is what happens. This is basically this idea that we just put people, and maybe we'll give them tools and we'll say, look, just drive, just make it happen. Come on, this is your job. You should know how to do this stuff. So the whole point here is we do this with our teams as well. We just don't empathize and we don't really think about how difficult these things are. And we just expect people to do this without actually being able to learn what they're meant to do. And the sad fact is, things are not working because people don't know. I mean, there are some people who are contrarian, but most of the time it's because people don't know what they should be doing in that level of detail. So with your teams, what can you do? Make sure you include some element of training when you're doing some of these changes. It's important for everyone to understand the same concepts, the same language, and understand what we're all talking about and not have this misunderstanding and confusion. You can do things like buying books, sending them on courses, maybe even running internal sessions, Q&A sessions where people can ask questions and learn a little bit from it. And the other thing I would say is try to make this a collaborative process. Again, a lot of people just say, I know what the process should be, I'm gonna set up this plan, I'm telling you what to do. Instead, bring people into the journey, make them part of the discussion on how we change and how we move to a better future, to better outcomes. And there's two advantages. First of all, they're seeing it as it's being built, so you're not going to have to educate them as much. They're going to get it and they're going to be able to start applying it. But secondly, they're going to hear the feedback. They're going to give you feedback. So they're going to be telling you what they experience when you're building this vision of a new way of working. So you're getting direct feedback before you even start doing things. So, you know, again, I want to emphasize that point. Empathize. Empathize with the people that you're trying to change. And then finally, this is one of two shameless plugs. Get a coach, you know, get someone external, you know. Joking aside, it can be really useful to have someone qualified, not just anybody, but someone who can be that impartial person that can hold a mirror up to you. When you're in the thick of it, it can be really hard to see what's important and to really get asked the uncomfortable questions and to be impartial. So having someone there that's qualified at coaching, not telling you what to do, can be super, super useful. So that's about how change is hard. Let's talk about how change is slow, how it takes time to change. So let's imagine now, I'm going to keep stretching that analogy with the Domino's pizza guy. Let's imagine that we can do 10 pizzas a day. But we've learned now, okay, we're going to go down the car route, but we're going to give them driving lessons. So let's say they get a couple of hours of driving lessons a day and they still go on the cycle. What do we think now that their delivery rate is going to be? Do we think, give me a show of hands if you think they're going to do more than 10 pizzas now? Okay, a couple of hands. Same as 10 pizzas, do you think? Nobody? Okay, less than 10 pizzas. Okay, that's the most of the people, yeah. And again, the answer will be a bit kind of like dependent on the person. But the truth is, I think we always forget that, I'm being facetious here with the working 9 to 5. It's not like we clock in and clock out. But people have a job, right? And there's only so much they can do in the day. They can't just fit everything in. And it's almost like we expect these people to continue delivering at the same rate with the old process while learning and switching over to the new process, which is just crazy. And we shouldn't really be doing this with our teams. Like, understanding this idea of building is the same as learning and changing. Like, delivering actual results is not the same as this. And you can't do them both at exactly the same time. So give people some slack and really take a step back and slow down. Accept that you have to go slow to go fast. There's no way around this. The world does not adapt to you. You need to adapt to the realities of the world. And what that means is, number one, engage with leadership, because a lot of the pressure comes from leadership. These are the guys and girls who are going to be pushing you to say, well, no, you can't go slow. We can't afford to go slow. And the problem is, I get that. And I understand that the business model means that we need to get here ASAP. But just because you want it doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? It just doesn't work that way. So first of all, we need to go slow. The second point of that is changing the mindset. I think Janna had some really good slides talking about the purpose of this is to learn. Success is not saying we are going to deliver more of the outcome. Because when we think about this, let's think about this from that perspective of delivering outcomes. Let's say we have a target to say, increase customer retention by 30% within 3 months. Leadership will look at that and say, you build for 3 months, and month 4, it goes up by 30%. If you don't do that, that's failure. But what we're doing with these experimental outcome-driven approaches is to say, look, we are going to test all these different things, and we are going to learn what that number could be. What is our capability of hitting? Like, what can we hit? Can we hit 0% increase, 10%, 15, 20, 30? We are exploring that area and discovering and moving towards that target. And the difference here is that the outcomes that we'll get is not that we build X features. That's not success. Success is saving time and getting as much effort for the savings of that time. So maybe we hit our target early and we finish in month 2. Maybe we come in underneath at 15%, but we now have an informed decision to keep going or to stop. Or maybe everything is a mess and we stop after a month. Like, just imagine that, right? You're running an experiment, and a month into a 3-month initiative, you say, we should just stop. This is pointless. We should just stop and do something else. Most companies would look at that and say, that's complete failure. We failed. But that's like genuinely good success. You just saved 2 months and a lot of hassle. That's a good thing. Why are we looking at that like that's failure? So when you engage with leadership, the definition of success is one of the most important things. And like we said, lowering the targets and setting lower expectations. Now, I just want to put a caveat on that. That doesn't mean we don't measure and we don't try to improve. It doesn't mean, okay, you've got 3 months, do whatever you feel like with no implications. Measure the baseline. So we had our kind of target of 10. Okay, let's remeasure how we're doing. And let's see, okay, now we're down to 2, but are we getting up to 3, to 5, to 10? If we think 100 is the end goal, are we getting closer bit by bit? So you want to measure, review, and iterate on this rather than just being like, okay, it's 3 months off to have like whatever you want to do. So keep measuring what you're doing rather than but just don't hold people to unrealistic expectations. So last but not least, change is pretty big, or it can become quite big. So let's imagine this. So this is the question for you guys now. Imagine we've done all the discovery work. So let's say we've got an initiative like, we want to do something for 3 months. We've done all the discovery work. We've kind of like explored the problem, confirmed the problem exists. We've done all the solution ideation. We've tested it. And now we've got some designs, and it's like 3 months to build those designs. How do we go about building those designs? Any volunteers to suggest how we would get it? So you've got 3 months worth of designs. What would you do with your development teams? Anyone? Come on, anyone, just say whatever. Estimate, okay. And then what would you do with the estimates? And yeah, prioritize, start building it. You would start cutting it up into smaller pieces. You would start to work on it. And like that's the thing is like, we break it up into agile pieces, right? I mean, you can even be more agile, and I kind of push that a little bit with that tenuous example. You wouldn't do 3 months worth of design work in one go. You would discover a chunk, you would break the problem up, you would go through the whole process for one piece. You'd kind of adapt, you would kind of adjust your expectations. You would move based on what you learn as you go through this. So I was a little cheeky with my example there, but essentially we're agile when we build products. Why are we not agile when we actually try to change process? Why do we try to do big bang changes in process and expect to hit the final target in one go? Why are we not learning from what we're trying to change? So the point there is, how do we break this down into smaller iterative chunks? So when we have large roadmaps, do we need to do all of this as outcomes right now, or can we pick a part of the roadmap? If we have a lot of teams, do we need to get everyone working the new way, or can we experiment with one out of the teams that we have? And then how do we bring all that uncertainty and make that part of the process in terms of learning? How do we actually learn from what we're doing? So the answer here is you can start doing things like pilot programs. So start really small and test the approach. So pick an initiative and try to do it with experiments and with outcomes, right? So just pick one thing and try to do one thing. We are not committing to changing the whole way that we work. We are just learning what experiments mean for us in our company, and what does that mean for us to make that change. Now, one question you'll have is like, do you make it as easy as possible to increase the chances that you get all the way through it, or do you make it quite realistic and tough? I think that really depends on your situation. So if you are in an environment where stakeholders don't believe in this, you probably want to make it as easy as possible to deliver something, because if it fails, that stakeholders will jump on it and they will be like, no, this doesn't work, experiments are rubbish, don't do experiments again, let's go back to outputs. But if you are more realistic about this, you might say, well, we don't know, like stakeholder discussion is one of the problems we're trying to solve. So maybe we want to show that experiments can solve that issue, so that's part of the initial scope. So really figure out where you are and meet the team where you are to understand what you should be doing for this pilot. Make it as easy or as hard as is appropriate for you. Don't make it too easy, don't make it too hard. Find what's right. And then make sure you're reviewing and iterating. Do a pilot. See how that went. Decide, do we want to do another pilot because we need to go deeper and learn better? Or are we ready to start scaling out and doing more pilots across multiple teams? Again, I don't have the answers. You guys need to make judgment calls and understand and review and really assess what you need to do based on what makes sense. But my whole kind of thing I'm trying to get at is make this an iterative process. Even the way you work should be an iterative process rather than trying to make one big massive change. And then just to wrap all of this up, just be pragmatic. So I think one of the worst things you can be is dogmatic. I think maybe we've all worked with, I say the word Scrum Master, maybe people will have a negative reaction here, but it's like, how many people have worked with like really dogmatic Scrum Masters that don't listen to you and just say, Scrum, no, this is not Scrum, right? It's a very common meme almost. So don't dictate, collaborate. Work with people, like we said. And then be prioritized, be very clear on priorities. You might think, like, outcomes are great, don't get me wrong. But maybe that's not what you should be doing right now. If you cannot run, like even if your engineers are not agile and can't even build on time, then trying to get them to do experiments is just too far. If you don't have any consensus around stakeholders and there's just too much debate and that's the problem right now, then maybe outcomes aren't the thing you need to work on. If you have no data or feedback mechanisms and you don't know what you should be doing, maybe outcomes can wait until you've fixed that problem. So one thing I like to say with clients, and give me a show of hands, have you ever heard the expression meta backlog or a meta roadmap? Has anyone heard of that expression? Okay, no? So I've never heard anyone talk about it, but it's something I talk about a lot. To me, it's this idea of like, we have a product backlog and a roadmap. Why not have one for the way you work? One for the problems that you face. So the idea is, and I could do a whole talk on that, is the idea of like, list the problems you have, prioritize, and start attacking it, and put aside time and energy and training resources to fixing those problems. You know, like 30% of your time to get better at the big problems that you're facing. And then finally is accepting defeat. So this is, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, especially with the last slide, one of the last points, but sometimes you just can't win them all. Like sometimes you can't change this. You are trying to get leaders, stakeholders, engineers, designers, all to change the way they work, and they all think differently, they have different priorities, so it's not all on you to change this as the person in the product team. It physically can't be. You need to delegate responsibility outwards, right? That's why we say collaborate, not dictate. And equally, you might hit situations where you just can't achieve it. Like, hands up if you've ever had a CEO that said, I don't care what you think and data and all this stuff, this is what we're building and this is what we should do. Have you had that before, a leader or a thing like that? Like, if you're having that discussion with the CEO, who do you think is going to win that discussion? It doesn't matter if you're right. Let's be blunt about it. It doesn't matter if you're right. That goes one way. So just being realistic is important as well. Don't beat yourself up over this stuff, because it is tough. So just some quick resources, because obviously, like I said, this is just a very summarized talk, but Outcomes Over Outputs is a great book. It's very short, but it's a good practical guide about the detail of outcomes and how to differentiate between that and outputs and everything. Now, OKRs, I love OKRs, but I also have a love-hate relationship. I think they're amazing, and they're also very misunderstood. I think I could do a talk about that for like hours. But this is if you're going with OKRs, I really recommend this. I love this book. It's very practical. Now, there is Measure What Matters, which is, I think, the Bible, the guy who introduced OKRs to Google and started this whole thing. He wrote a book. But if you can only read one, I would recommend Radical Focus, because it's far more practical and it's very pragmatic. And I love this style of like, it's like a novel in the sense of like, it's a story. Like this founder's having a problem, fix this problem, then find another problem, then fix this problem. So it takes you through step by step how you build an iterative process rather than like telling you what you should do, basically. Now, when you're doing experiments, discovery is a big part of this because you're experimenting, researching, so continuous discovery habits, great practical guide on what that means in reality and how to like define your backlog, opportunity trees, and all that kind of stuff. And then, I promise, last shameless plug, me, hey. So books, courses, all great, but if you want someone that you want to, like again, and you can just come and have a conversation. I have tons of like just chats with people just to kind of give some advice, or if you want to work together, then I am around, so plug over. So that's it. And then feedback-wise, if you don't mind, I would love feedback. I have really done a convoluted thing and printed out a QR code so you could just scan this. I don't know why I did this. I don't have a printer, and I kind of just messed this whole thing up. But if you would like to give me feedback, then you can scan this. I'll leave this on the table here. You can scan it, and please be brutally honest as much as you can. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I am quite sensitive, but I'm learning to deal with that. So, oh, God, I see. I've already messed it up, haven't I? I've messed it up, see? I should have tested it properly. Anyway, so that's feedback in itself. Did not test feedback mechanism. Yeah, so really messed that one up. And yeah, that's it. That's me. You can reach out. That's my email. That's on LinkedIn. I'm not on. I am on Twitter, but I'm never on Twitter. I've had this outcome for 2 years now to be on Twitter more, and I just haven't cracked it yet. I mean, I'm off Facebook. I'm off Instagram. So like, LinkedIn is pretty much the only place you would probably find me. So yes, if you want to reach out, feel free to reach out, and we can have a chat. But that's it from me, and I will stop rambling. Over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to pull up slide 3. Actually, no, it's slide 4. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Navin. Excellent talk. And with regards to that QR code, I'm sure we can find a way to get that presented perhaps on the YouTube later on in the comments or something, and we can get you your feedback. Excellent. So what I'm going to do is just leave that open for a minute to let questions start to filter in. While people are asking questions in the Slido there, and just to address the question at the back there, I wasn't able to delete, unfortunately, when I was trying to go through it. Could be just in the moment thing, but I will just filter through when we go through the questions themselves. But yeah, whilst people are asking questions, and while I give you a bit of time to ask some questions, Mind the Product conference is going to be on the 13th of October to the 14th of October, and those are currently on sale, going to be based in the Barbican. So again, another way you can get involved in the Mind the Product and ProductTank community. Excellent. So probably a little bit of adjustment to make sure we're in frame for the questions for the people online, and then we will jump into them. So I'm just going to open up the Slido now. Okie dokie. All right. Do you guys want to jump up? Yeah, if you perhaps just come and stand here. I'll just check with you that we're in shot, and then we'll run through the questions. Perhaps you do a quick test of the mic, make sure that it's working as expected.
Hello, testing.
Hello.
Brilliant. Excellent. We've had some great questions come through, so we'll probably try to do 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end here. And I will start with, what's your kind of preferred approach? Would you like me to try to direct a question, or are you happy to jump in between the two of you?
I like chaos, so however you like, honestly.
We could just try it and see how it goes, iterate, you know.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So.
Figure it out.
Excellent. Get some feedback.
Brilliant. Hashtag lean life.
Brilliant. So first question here, I think it's something that both of you kind of touched upon, but it was, I want to use outcome-based roadmaps, but my company focuses heavily on features. How do I start trying to influence them from the bottom up?
Right, yeah, I mean, I'll take a first stab at that. Okay, so your team is focused on features. You want to move to the outcome. I mean, this is one of the things that I said people are going to ask about, because this is where a lot of teams are. So the first thing to do is figure out why your team is stuck on features and what it is that they think that they're getting from it. So, you know, sometimes it might be that the boss in the team is feature driven, like they've got this vision of what it is that they want to see done, and they're the one who's driving it. And actually, sometimes it helps to talk to them and say, like, well, hold on, you know, here's what you think that we should be doing, but I've done some research and we've discovered, based on some stuff, that actually here's some other things that we could be doing. Here's some other problem areas. You know, sometimes it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. And sometimes being able to turn around and say, well, the roadmap last time I showed you was this, but the roadmap now is based on the problems. And so you sort of wrap the features around those problems. And then if they're not able to say where those features fit into those problems, like, well, what problem does this solve? If they can't answer that, and they can't tie it back to a problem that it's solving for the customers or for the business, then what are those features doing on the roadmap? So the roadmap can actually be a tool to help you make that change in your company. Now, it also might be that the features are being driven by a very client-driven, agency almost driven, sales-driven type of space where, have you ever worked for a company where, you're a product manager and yet somehow sales tells you what to build because they've already sold it, right? Well, congratulations, you actually work for an agency, not a product company, and it sucks. I've worked there before. And what's actually happening there is that the company is basically outsourcing its discovery to clients, its highest bidder. And the chances that the discovery is being done well by these clients is slim to none, right? Like what they're actually doing is basically saying, well, we're going to take the month of September and sell it to client A. We're going to take the month of October and sell it to client B. Each time you do that, you're doing delivery. And yeah, you might be getting paid for these features that you're doing for them, but the chances that these features add up to this greater picture that's going to allow you to do the big hockey stick swoosh that you've probably promised to the world is slim to none. So what you need to do is point this out to your bosses, like say, we need time for discovery. We need to discover what the big problems to solve are for our market so that we can actually create something of value for the wider market. You can't just keep selling our time because we're never going to do discovery. We're just stuck in delivery mode. So those are two of the really common ones that I see. There's other reasons why people might want to be feature driven, but you can start picking away at the different things and coming up with ways around or objections for them.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, just to add, because that was a great answer, just one thing I'd add, just like a tactical thing, what I found on the ground when you're trying to start this stuff off. An approach I find that really works when you're with political stakeholders is to start to reverse engineer the outputs into outcomes. So you do all the work and you start to do the work and you start to show them. So you're doing all the work, but you're showing them and you're explaining, constantly explaining. This is why it's better to do it this way because see the advantage and go through 2 loops and show them and demonstrate that outcomes have better results than doing outputs. And then you do this iteratively. So then you start to sit with them and reverse engineer together. So effectively, it's like, okay, now we're doing the process together and they're learning how to reverse engineer. And then when they're comfortable with that, then you move to, okay, now you come to me with an outcome and we'll start from there. The problem I find is that people just say, this is our form. If you want to request a feature, this is the form and you need to fill out these things. And that's technically true and it saves you a lot of time, but it kind of destroys the relationship and it makes it really hard because you're saying, F you, silo, hand what I want in the way I want without any explanation. So if you can engage with them, that's good. And then, because I think on that level you can do it, the harder thing is like, which outcome should we work on in that discussion and the strategy, which is like, that's really hard to do from the bottom up, to be blunt, and probably outside the scope of this question. So,
excellent, thank you very much, brilliant. Thank you to whoever sent that question in. Next question here on the Slido, we have a question that says, how do you handle pseudo OKRs? It's a phenomenon where a leader has a specific feature idea and then pseudo formulates OKRs. What to do as a product team?
Well, that's literally the story that I told you about, where it's like we had an outcome and there was like basically just they'd reverse engineered, but they weren't happy with the actual result that was coming out. So I think it's having that open, honest conversation of like, okay, are we doing an outcome? There will be signals and signs that show you this when people are essentially pushing you in one direction. I think it's really important to have your ducks in line. So you need to have the data, you need to be doing the discovery, because what I find more of a trend nowadays is founders and leaders taking a step back and saying, yeah, you can try it, and being a bit more kind of hands-off, but they still have their opinions. So when you have that autonomy and that power to do discovery, make sure you're coming up with good answers. And what I mean by that is not saying that you have a solution that nails it, but even having like the research that shows that these are 3 or 4 things and this is the best one, or just overall we still can't find a good solution, and including the option that they're looking for in the test as well, right? You don't want to just ignore what they've said, make that part of the discussion in the discovery process. It's much harder to argue against kind of customer research, data, and all that kind of stuff. If you don't have that, then you should maybe focus on getting that in place, because you're flying blind in that company and you can't really have any meaningful discussions with people if you're not collecting some data or some feedback.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Have you got anything to add to that one? Are we happy to move on? Yeah, go on. Yes, excellent. Brilliant. So, thank you. So the next question we have from the crowd, I think, is the roadmaps or review of where the product is going and used to get stakeholder agreement, not a timeline. Is part of lean road mapping about education? If so, how?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the really key things about lean road mapping. It's about bringing the team along for the journey of what the strategy could be, right? Because you're not creating this perfect plan. You're not sitting there in some high tower going, I have all the knowledge and I've created the plan and I'm just going to tell you all. It's about getting your team's collective knowledge and getting them on board with it and making sure that the team is brought along with the thing. So when you present back the roadmap, that ultimately it is your job to put it together, but they should see their own knowledge fed into that roadmap, reflected back at them. No one should be surprised when you present the roadmap, because they're like, oh yeah, we actually was part of that conversation when we decided that this is more important than this, and that this other thing is going to be happening in the later times. And so it's a tool in which you can use to teach them how product management works and the nature of product management and how decisions are working. Like, one of the problems that I had as a younger product manager early in my career is that people thought that product management was this black box. They fed me ideas and they would just disappear into the ether. And the ether was my pile of Post-it notes, or maybe my it was before Jira, like track board or whatever, right? It would disappear into my list somewhere. And they'd be wondering, like, well, I came up with this idea, where have you put it? And I wasn't able to show them the thinking behind, well, if you give me a suggestion, I've got a lot of other things to compare it against. The roadmap and the road mapping process should show them, here's how ideas turn into actual initiatives, actual experiments we're trying. Here's where your stuff stacks up against everybody else's. Here's why we're working on this stuff, because our main objective is this, so that's why we're prioritizing this stuff. So it brings the whole team along the journey and helps them understand, what product management actually does. So product managers aren't this mysterious decision maker in the corner, but it's actually a decision-making process. And it's not you as the product manager who said no, it's the product management system that said no to their idea. And it helps them get more on board with why certain things happen in a certain order.
Brilliant. Yeah, nothing I can add. Nailed it.
Amazing. In the interest of time, I think we'll probably try to stick to two more questions. And just a reminder that Janna and Navin have shared their profile, so if you have any other questions, to reach out to them. We have one here. It says, for an initiative, is the key success criteria a metric distinct from the key result, or the objective's key result? Question.
Honestly, it depends. So in the model that I was showing and talking about, where I was saying you've got objectives and initiatives and key results, you'd have initiatives on the roadmap, and those would be attached to objectives, and each of those initiatives, if you drilled in, would be connected to key results, and those objectives would be connected to those key results. But honestly, do what works for you. Like, OKRs are a framework, and frameworks are meant to be mixed and matched and kind of bashed apart to work with your own team. So, you might have metrics at certain levels, different ways that you measure those initiatives. Honestly, like, what you should be looking for is saying up front before you work on something, here's what good looks like. And then after you work on something, saying, did it work, right? As to what level and how detailed you go on those things and how you attach them together, honestly, like, do what works for your team. We've got examples on our sandbox and in our library of stuff that we talk about. You can find examples all over the place, but if it doesn't fit with your team, then don't worry about it. If what we do does work for you, awesome, copy it, like, run with it, it works.
Yeah, can I quickly just add to
go
that?
ahead,
just add, again, just to be clear, not to not, yeah. The one thing I found really useful from that book, Outcomes Over Outputs, is the idea of, like, different levels of metrics. So you have, like, impact metrics, and again, even customer retention to me is an impact metric, which is like a business metric. It's a top level thing. You can't directly influence it. It's just top level. It's an aggregation of lots of behaviors underneath. The next level then is the actual behaviors, and that's the stuff that people are doing, and it's independent of the implementation. So someone, like, let's say you're an e-commerce site and you care about retention, right? Retention. But what that means is someone comes back and makes a purchase within 30 days of at least this much amount. Or you might be earlier stage where you don't have a great thing and you go, it's just enough for they come back and look for a product. So the definition of the behaviors and what's relevant really depends on you and your product, so it's more specific. but that's like the middle layer. And then the bottom is like the actual interactions and the clicks, like the very tactical metrics. It's like what button did they click and what platform were they on and stuff. So you have 3-level stuff. And what I find happens is you talk with leadership about the top level impact. But the discovery process is really translating that to discover the right behaviors to focus on. And that could be like, if we increase this behavior, everything will go great because we see it in the data. Or it could be, I have a hypothesis if we do this. And that's fine, but you got to test it. And then that's your kind of like, that's where your OKR, the key result kind of stuff comes from, of like, what do the successful behaviors look like? And I find a lot of teams struggle with the lowest level metrics because you haven't designed the solution, so you don't know what those metrics are. So even to measure those middle metrics, you need to define the lower metrics. So be patient, because as you start to design the solution, that detail will come out, and then you can link it to the mid-level metrics, and leadership will care about the top-level metrics. So,
yeah, really well said. Thank you.
Amazing, brilliant. And then final question for us before we end the session is potentially a slightly controversial one, but it's also good to think about these things and kind of adapt to them. So what do we think are potentially any weaknesses that you potentially have seen using the now, next, later style of roadmap?
Good question. All right. I mean, one of the problems with the now, next, later roadmap is a lot of people assume that the now, next, later means that you don't have dates. And the thing is, like, we don't live in La La Land. Like, you can put dates on that roadmap. All you're doing is you're not penalizing yourself by putting dates on everything. So, you know, a lot of people sort of go the complete opposite way and go, you know what, no dates, they're not going to commit to anything. And that's actually not right, because sometimes you do have commitments, right? Like sometimes there might be something that's strategically important. You're working in e-commerce. If it's not out by Christmas or Black Friday, then you know the work that you're doing has lost value after that time. Maybe you have a regulatory due date. You know, whenever remember when GDPR came out, everyone had a due date on the roadmap. Now the key thing is just to make sure that you're not putting dates on everything. You're putting them on the key things so you can communicate them to the people on the roadmap, and then move things around those roadmaps around those roadmap initiatives, those cards, so that people can understand where they actually sit. But that's one of the biggest misconceptions with the now, next, later is like, oh, well, we can't have no dates. Like we're a real company with people who need dates. We're like, that's okay. You can still do that.
Yeah, I want to add, but I'm going to try to be succinct because I could just talk for like a long time. The first point I would make is, like, as you said, it depends. It depends on what works for you. So, for example, I originally wanted this talk to be like a roadmap leveling conversation of like level 0, you start with literally a glorified to-do list because things are so chaotic. You can't even think about anything. You're just surviving, particularly on your first day in a chaotic startup. And you move up the levels, and now next is one level along there. I actually like kind of going to the company strategy level. So going beyond now next and saying, let's put outcomes into quarters. And essentially we have buckets for outcomes. And it's like, this is what we want to achieve. And then setting up linear priorities so we go through the outcomes and we are reviewing and learning as we go along and changing our plan and adjusting what we do based on what we see as going through the quarter. But it really does depend, because if you have a chaos, you maybe now, next, later just doesn't work for you, or maybe you beyond that, essentially. So yeah, that's my kind of short answer to that.
Amazing, brilliant. Well, I think we will leave it there. If the crowd wouldn't mind giving a hand to these two phenomenal speakers. Brilliant. Well, excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you as well to the crowd. Great to see so many people taking notes, taking photos. That's exactly why we all do this. Yeah, I think potentially some refreshments left at the end there. And sorry, I will just address as well. Thank you to everyone who joined online. And I think we'll close it there.
Are you sticking around for, like, to just...
Yeah, of course. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, cool. All right.
Thanks,
Brilliant.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, round of applause for Surajan as well, by the way. Yeah. Thanks, guy. And James, a round of applause for James as well.